I'm Amanda, 32 female. I live a quiet life in a small city, surrounded by history. As an archivist for the local historical society, my days are spent preserving the stories of others, carefully handling brittle papers and cataloging artifacts that carry the weight of generations. It's a peaceful existence, one that has always felt right for me. My world was built on the foundations of truth, history, and promises kept, until my own sister shattered that foundation with a single, selfish act. This is the story of how I discovered her betrayal and used my unique skills to reclaim not just a family heirloom, but the very legacy my grandmother intended for me. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My grandmother, Rose, was the anchor of our family. She wasn't a woman of grand gestures or loud pronouncements. Her love was in the details. It was in the way she'd hum while baking, the scent of lavender that always clung to her sweaters, and the stories she told, each one a thread in the rich tapestry of our family's history. I inherited my love for the past from her. While my older sister, Jessica, was always looking forward to the next trend, the next party, the next big thing, I was content to look back, to sit at Grandma Rose's feet and listen. She passed away 2 years ago, a gentle fading that left a cavernous hole in my life. We all gathered to sort through her belongings, a process that felt both sacred and heartbreaking. Jessica, ever the pragmatist, moved through the house with an efficient, almost clinical detachment, making lists and tagging furniture for sale. I moved slowly, touching things, remembering. The old rocking chair where she'd read to me. The chipped teacup she always used. For Jessica, it was about liquidating assets. For me, it was about preserving memories. The most important of these memories was tied to a small, velvet-covered box she kept on her vanity. Inside rested the Rose collection, a delicate necklace, a matching bracelet, and a pair of earrings, all crafted from white gold with intricate filigree in the shape of blooming roses, each with a tiny diamond at its center. It was her most treasured possession, a gift from my grandfather on their 25th wedding anniversary. I remember being about 10 years old, sitting on her bed as she carefully opened the box. The light caught the diamonds, scattering tiny rainbows across the ceiling. "This is special, Amanda," she'd said, her voice soft. "It's a symbol of a love that lasts. It's a piece of our history." She looked at me, her eyes clear and serious. "Jessica loves shiny, new things, but you, my dear, you understand the value of things that have a story. When I'm gone, this is for you. It's a promise." That promise became a secret, sacred pact between us. I never spoke of it to Jessica. It wasn't something to be flaunted, it was a quiet understanding. After Grandma's passing, during the difficult task of clearing her room, I saw the velvet box on the vanity. My heart ached, but I felt a sense of peace. Grandma was gone, but her promise, her legacy of love, was safe. In the whirlwind of funeral arrangements and estate logistics, my parents decided it was best to keep all of Grandma's valuables, including the jewelry, in a safe at their house until things settled down. It seemed like a sensible plan. I knew the Rose collection was meant for me, and I was in no rush. I trusted my family. I trusted Jessica. Over the next 2 years, life moved on. Jessica was thriving, at least on the surface. She'd become a high-end real estate agent, her social media a curated gallery of expensive dinners, designer bags, and sold listings. She drove a luxury car and lived in a sleek, minimalist condo that looked like it belonged in a magazine. She always seemed to be chasing a lifestyle that was just a little beyond her reach, but she was a master of appearances. We weren't as close as we used to be. Our paths had diverged so much. My quiet life of archives and old books was a world away from her fast-paced, high-gloss existence. We'd have the occasional stilted phone call or obligatory family dinner, where she'd talk about closing a big deal or a lavish party she'd attended. I'd listen, nod, and talk about a fascinating 19th century diary I was transcribing. The distance between us felt like a chasm. Still, she was my sister. Underneath it all, I believed the bond we shared as children, the one forged in shared secrets and backyard forts, was still there, buried under layers of ambition and pretense. Last month, on the second anniversary of Grandma's passing, I felt a strong pull to finally bring the jewelry home. It felt like the right time. It was no longer about grieving. It was about honoring her memory, about keeping that piece of her clothes. I called my mom and asked if I could come by to pick up the box. "Of course, honey," she said. "It's time it was with you. Your grandmother would have wanted that." The next day, I drove to my parents' house, a familiar sense of anticipation and nostalgia washing over me. Mom led me to the study and opened the safe. There were a few other items inside: old bonds, my grandfather's watch, and there, in the back, was the dark blue velvet box. It looked smaller than I remembered. My mom handed it to me with a sad smile. "She loved you so much, Amanda." I clutched the box to my chest, my throat tight with emotion. I thanked my mom, gave her a hug, and headed home, my mind filled with images of Grandma Rose's smiling face. I couldn't wait to see it again, to hold the cool weight of the gold in my hand, to feel that tangible connection to her. I imagined wearing the necklace, carrying her love and her story with me. The weight of her promise felt so real, so present, contained within that simple velvet box I held in my hands. It was the last, purest piece of her I had left. The drive home was a quiet, reflective journey. I placed the velvet box on the passenger seat, glancing at it every so often as if to reassure myself it was real. The setting sun cast long shadows across the road, and the world seemed to hold its breath in anticipation with me. Back in my small, cozy apartment, surrounded by my books and the comfortable silence I cherished, I felt ready. This wasn't just about jewelry. It was a ritual, a private communion with my grandmother's memory. I made a cup of tea, just as she used to, and sat at my wooden dining table. The apartment was quiet, the only sound the gentle hum of the refrigerator. I ran my fingers over the worn velvet of the box. It was soft, almost fragile, a testament to the decades it had been cherished. Taking a deep breath, I slowly lifted the lid. And my world stopped. It was empty. The fitted, cream-colored satin inside was pristine, with 3 distinct impressions where the necklace, bracelet, and earrings should have been. But they were gone. All that remained were the hollow shapes of a broken promise. My first thought was one of utter confusion. A mistake. It had to be a mistake. Maybe my parents had moved it somewhere else for safekeeping. Maybe they'd had it cleaned and forgotten to put it back. My mind scrambled for a logical explanation, for any reason that wasn't the one lurking in the dark corners of my consciousness. My hands started to tremble. I picked up my phone, my fingers fumbling with the screen as I dialed my mother. Her voice was cheerful when she answered, and it felt like a physical blow. "Mom," I said, my own voice sounding thin and distant. "The box, it's empty." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "What? Amanda, what are you talking about? That's impossible. I saw it myself when we put it in the safe." "Well, it's empty now," I repeated, the reality of the words sinking in like stones. "The necklace, the bracelet, the earrings, they're all gone." I could hear the panic rising in her voice. "Oh my God, were we robbed? But the safe wasn't forced, nothing else is missing." She trailed off, and the silence that followed was heavy with a dawning, terrible realization. I could hear my father's voice in the background, asking what was wrong. And then my mother said the name that I had been desperately trying to push away. "Jessica," she whispered. "Oh no, surely not." The moment she said it, I knew. The confusion evaporated, replaced by a cold, sickening certainty. Jessica, of course. Who else had access? Who else knew the safe combination? Who else would be so brazen? The memory of her pragmatic, detached attitude while clearing Grandma's house suddenly seemed sinister. Her constant need for money to fund her lavish lifestyle, her talk of assets instead of memories, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. "She was here last week," my mom said, her voice trembling now. "She said she needed to get some old tax documents of hers that were stored in the study. She was in there alone for a few minutes." A few minutes, that's all it would have taken. The conversation with my parents devolved into a blur of disbelief and frantic what-ifs. My dad, ever the protector, wanted to call Jessica and confront her immediately. My mom, ever the peacemaker, urged caution, desperate to believe there was some misunderstanding. But I knew with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, cold and heavy as lead. After I hung up, I just sat there, staring at the empty box. The hollowed-out satin was a perfect metaphor for how I felt, scooped out, empty. The betrayal was so profound it was almost surreal. This wasn't just about money or a piece of jewelry. Jessica had taken something irreplaceable. She had taken Grandma Rose's story, her legacy of love, and sold it. She had looked at a promise made to me, a sacred trust, and saw only a price tag. The quiet of my apartment, usually a comfort, now felt oppressive. Every corner seemed to echo with the silence of what was missing. I thought of my grandmother's words. Jessica loves shiny, new things, but you understand the value of things that have a story. Grandma had seen the difference in us so clearly. And Jessica, with this one act, had proven her right in the most brutal way imaginable. My grief for my grandmother, which had softened into a gentle ache over the past 2 years, came rushing back, sharp and raw, but now it was tangled with a new, fiery emotion. Rage. A pure, clean anger that burned away the shock and the sorrow. How could she? How could my own sister, who grew up under the same roof, who was loved by the same grandmother, commit such a profound act of desecration? I closed the lid of the empty box. The soft click echoed in the silence. The pact between me and my grandmother had been broken by my sister's deceit. My parents could handle the confrontation. They could deal with the family drama, the tears, and the inevitable denials. My path was different. As an archivist, my job was to find the truth, to follow the evidence, and to preserve what is valuable. And in that moment, I realized that's exactly what I was going to do. Jessica had made a critical mistake. She assumed I was just the quiet, passive sister who lived in the past. She had no idea that my love for the past had taught me exactly how to uncover it. The days following the discovery were a storm of family turmoil. My father, true to his word, called Jessica immediately. The conversation, which I heard recounted later through my mother's tearful summary, was a masterclass in manipulation on Jessica's part. She feigned shock, then outrage. How could they accuse her? She was hurt, wounded that they would even think such a thing. She cried, she yelled, she turned the accusation back on them, questioning the security of their home and even subtly suggesting that perhaps I had misplaced it and was trying to blame her. She was so convincing that she planted a seed of doubt in my mother's mind, just as she intended. My father remained steadfast, but without proof, it was a stalemate. The family was fractured, the tension a toxic cloud over every interaction. I stayed out of it. I knew arguing with Jessica was like wrestling with smoke. She would twist reality until you were the one apologizing. My anger had cooled from a raging fire to a focused, blue flame. I wasn't interested in shouting matches, I was interested in facts. I needed proof. My archivist instincts took over. Every artifact has a story, a provenance, you just have to know how to trace it. The jewelry was gone, but it had to have gone somewhere. Jessica wouldn't just hide it in a drawer, her actions were driven by a need for cash. She would have sold it. The question was, to whom? A standard pawn shop? A private buyer? Posting it on a generic online marketplace seemed too risky, too traceable. Jessica was careless, but she wasn't stupid. She would have gone to someone she thought was discreet. My search began online, but not in the obvious places. I started frequenting the websites and forums of local and regional jewelers, antique dealers, and collectors. It was a long shot, I knew. Most high-end transactions happen privately. But sometimes, dealers post about new acquisitions to attract specific collectors, or a community member might mention a recent, interesting purchase. I spent my evenings scrolling through pages of estate jewelry, Art Deco rings, and Victorian lockets. It was a digital needle in a haystack. For 2 weeks, I found nothing. The family Cold War continued, with my parents caught in the middle of Jessica's manufactured outrage and my quiet, unnerving certainty. I could feel their hope wavering. Maybe they had been wrong. Maybe I was wrong. I started to doubt myself. Was I so blinded by my old feelings of being second best to my sister that I had jumped to a conclusion? Then, one rainy Tuesday night, I found it. It was on a niche online forum for antique collectors in our state. The forum was a place for enthusiasts to discuss finds, ask for advice on restorations, and occasionally post about items they were seeking or had recently acquired. I was scrolling through a thread titled, "Recent Acquisitions, Post Your Best Finds," when a new comment caught my eye. The username was Sterling Antiques. The comment was brief. Just acquired a lovely mid-century white gold filigree set, necklace, bracelet, and earrings. Rose motif with diamond chips. A truly exquisite example of post-war craftsmanship. Will be available after a professional cleaning and appraisal. My heart stopped beating. Rose motif, white gold filigree, a set. It had to be it. It was too specific, too perfect. My breath hitched. I clicked on the username and it took me to a profile page. The profile belonged to a Mr. Sterling, owner of Sterling Antiquities, a reputable antique shop in a city about 2 hours away. The shop specialized in fine jewelry and historical artifacts. I stared at the name. Sterling, Mr. Sterling. The name echoed in my memory, trying to connect to something. Why did it feel so familiar? I closed my eyes, picturing Grandma Rose's house, her study filled with old books and photo albums. I thought about my sister. And then it hit me, a memory from years ago, sharp and clear. I was in college, visiting home for a weekend. Jessica, already chasing her future glamorous life, was in the process of decluttering some of her old things. She was talking excitedly about selling a collection of what she claimed were antique silver spoons she'd found at a flea market. "I'm taking them to this old guy, a Mr. Sterling," she had bragged. "He pays top dollar for genuine antiques." I remembered the conversation that followed a few days later. She had been furious. "Can you believe it? That old fraud Sterling told me they were fakes, said they were cheap reproductions from the 70s. He knew right away. He embarrassed me," she had fumed. She ranted about how he was a pretentious old gatekeeper who thought he knew everything. He knew she had tried to sell fakes. My blood ran cold. Jessica hadn't just sold our grandmother's legacy to any dealer. She had sold it to the one dealer who already had her number. The one man who knew she had a history of trying to pass off counterfeit items as genuine. Why would she do that? It was either an act of sheer arrogance, believing she could fool him this time with a genuine article, or desperation. She needed money fast and probably went to the person she knew paid fairly, hoping he wouldn't connect the dots or care where the jewelry came from. This was it. This was the proof I needed. Mr. Sterling was not just the buyer, he was a potential witness. He knew Jessica, he knew her character. He was the key. A plan began to form in my mind. A quiet and meticulous strategy born from years of piecing together fragmented histories. I wasn't going to just get the jewelry back. That wasn't enough anymore. Jessica hadn't just committed a theft against me, she had committed a fraud against the memory of our grandmother. She had used something sacred in her web of deceit. And I was going to use my knowledge of history, of truth, and of provenance to unravel it all. I looked at the forum post again, the words glowing on my screen. The Sterling signature. It was more than just a name. It was the signature on my sister's confession, and I was going to make sure everyone saw it. The quiet archivist was about to become a historian of a very personal, very painful, and very recent crime. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. My quiet, orderly archives could wait. I had a new collection to acquire, evidence. The 2-hour drive to Mr. Sterling's city felt like a pilgrimage. The anger and grief that had been churning inside me had solidified into a calm, unshakable resolve. I wasn't going to burst into his shop with accusations. An archivist knows that the best way to get information is not through force, but through patience, respect, and a shared appreciation for the past. Sterling Antiquities was located on a charming, tree-lined street, nestled between a rare bookstore and a small art gallery. The shopfront was understated and elegant, with a deep green awning and a bay window displaying a few carefully selected items: a porcelain vase, a maritime clock, and a single, stunning sapphire ring on a velvet stand. It was the kind of place that valued quality over quantity. Taking a deep breath, I pushed open the heavy wooden door. A small bell chimed. The interior was just as I'd imagined. Quiet, filled with the scent of old wood and beeswax, and lined with glass cabinets containing treasures from bygone eras. Behind a large mahogany counter stood a man who had to be Mr. Sterling. He was in his late 50s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses and a neatly trimmed silver beard. He looked up from a document he was examining with a loupe, and gave me a polite, inquisitive smile. "Good morning," he said, his voice calm and measured. "How may I help you?" This was the moment. My heart pounded, but I kept my voice steady. "Good morning. My name is Amanda. I'm an archivist, and I believe you may have recently acquired an item that belonged to my late grandmother." His expression didn't change, but his eyes sharpened with professional interest. "Oh, and what item would that be?" "A white gold filigree set," I said, describing it in detail. The rose motif, the diamond chips, the specific design of the clasp on the necklace that I remembered from my childhood. It was a custom piece made for her in the 1950s. He listened intently, nodding slowly. When I finished, he gave a small, thoughtful hum. He didn't deny it. He didn't have to. I had seen the forum post. "I see," he said, his gaze searching my fa. "See, it's a beautiful set. It came into my possession just last week." "I know," I said softly. "It was sold to you by my sister, Jessica." At the mention of her name, a flicker of recognition crossed his face. It was subtle, but it was there. He remembered her. "Jessica," he repeated, the name sounding flat in the quiet shop. He looked at me again, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. He was connecting the dots. The shared last name, the story of a grandmother's jewelry. "She had no right to sell it," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "It was promised to me. It was a family heirloom of great sentimental value." Mr. Sterling leaned against the counter, folding his arms. He looked at me not as a customer, but as one professional to another. "Miss Amanda," he said, testing my name. "I am a legitimate businessman. I purchased the set in good faith from a woman who provided identification and signed a bill of sale attesting to her ownership." "I understand that," I said, my tone respectful. "And I'm not here to accuse you of any wrongdoing. I'm here because I believe my sister has not only stolen from our family, but she may have a history of misrepresenting the items she sells. I believe you may have had dealings with her before." This was the gamble. I was showing my hand. He could have shut me down, cited client confidentiality, and shown me the door. But I was banking on his professional pride, his disdain for fakes, and the people who peddle them. He was silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. He was recalling the incident with the silver spoons. I could see it on his face. "Your sister," he finally said, his voice laced with a weary distaste, "is not a connoisseur of antiques. She is a connoisseur of opportunity." The validation in his words was so powerful it almost made my knees weak. He knew, he remembered. "Several years ago, she attempted to sell me a set of spoons she claimed were 18th century sterling," he explained, his voice low. "They were laughably poor reproductions. I keep a small, private ledger of such encounters. A provenance record, if you will, for people who try to pass off fakes. It helps to protect the integrity of the market." My archivist's heart leaped. A ledger, a record, it was more than I could have ever hoped for. "Mr. Sterling," I said, leaning forward slightly, "my sister has shattered my family. She has taken something sacred and treated it like a commodity. I don't just want the jewelry back. I want her to face the consequences of her actions, not just for this, but for her pattern of deceit." I explained my idea. It wasn't fully formed yet, but the centerpiece was him, his expertise, his credibility, and his records. He seemed to understand immediately. There was a shared language between us, the language of authenticity, of history, of things being what they claim to be. My sister's entire life was a counterfeit, and he, a man who dealt in the genuine, recognized it instantly. "She signed a bill of sale for her grandmother's jewelry," he mused, tapping a finger on the glass countertop. And in that document, she attested that she was the sole legal owner. A document which is, in itself, a fraud. I finished for him. He looked at me, and for the first time, a small, grim smile touched his lips. I run a very quiet, very reputable business, Amanda. I do not appreciate being used by opportunistic amateurs, whether they are selling fakes or stolen family heirlooms. He straightened up, a decision made. Come, he said, gesturing towards a door behind the counter. Let me show you my provenance record. He led me into a small, meticulously organized office. From a locked drawer in his desk, he retrieved a handsome, leather-bound ledger. He opened it, and there, in elegant, precise script, was an entry dated 7 years prior. It detailed Jessica's name, the description of the counterfeit spoons, and his assessment. Item is a modern forgery. Seller is either profoundly ignorant or intentionally deceptive. Advised her of the item's true nature. Reaction was hostile. Recommend caution in any future dealings. It was perfect. It was a written record of her character, of her history of deceit, penned by an unimpeachable expert. Mr. Sterling had just handed me the weapon I needed. We now had 2 documented instances of her fraudulent behavior, one from the past and one from the present. The trap was beginning to take shape. Leaving Mr. Sterling's shop felt like stepping out of the darkness and into the light. I had the truth in my hands, not just the emotional truth I'd felt all along, but cold, hard, documented proof. The drive home was the opposite of my journey there. The anxiety was gone, replaced by a steely focus. I wasn't just reacting anymore, I was planning. I was weaving a trap, and every thread had to be perfect. My first call was to my father. I didn't tell him everything, not yet. I needed to control the flow of information carefully. Wooly. Dad, I said, my voice calm and confident. I have a plan to get Grandma's jewelry back and to prove Jessica took it. But I need you to trust me completely and do exactly as I say. My father, weary from weeks of tension and Jessica's denials, was ready to grasp at any straw of hope. Anything, Amanda. What do you need? I need you to call a family meeting, I explained. Tell everyone, you, Mom, and Jessica, that a wealthy collector, a client of a friend of yours, heard about Grandma's jewelry and is interested in purchasing it for a significant amount of money. Say that he's a serious collector of post-war jewelry and that he wants a formal, independent appraisal done before making an offer. There was a pause, but Jessica sold it. How does this help? Just trust me, Dad. The key is the appraisal. Tell Jessica that for the deal to go through, the entire original set needs to be present and authenticated. Tell her the offer is contingent on its completeness and provenance. Tell her the offer is, let's say, $50,000. I picked a number that was high enough to be irresistibly tempting to someone like my sister. My dad was quiet for a moment, processing. So you want her to, what? Magically produce the jewelry she already sold? Exactly, I said. You're creating a problem for her that only she can solve. You're going to force her hand. It was a risky gambit. I was betting on 2 things, Jessica's greed and her arrogance. The greed would make her want that $50,000. The arrogance would make her believe she could somehow pull it off, that she could buy the jewelry back from the dealer for a low price, get it appraised for a high price, and pocket the massive difference. She would see it as the ultimate flip, the deal of a lifetime, never suspecting that the wealthy collector was a fiction and the appraiser was the linchpin of my entire plan. The final piece of the puzzle was the appraiser himself, Mr. Sterling. I had discussed the outline of this with him in his shop, and he had agreed, with a hint of relish, to play his part. He was not just an antique dealer, he was also a certified appraiser. He would be our independent expert. Over the next few days, the trap was set. My father, playing his role beautifully, called Jessica. He presented the story of the wealthy collector. As I predicted, Jessica's initial reaction was feigned confusion. But Dad, I don't have it. I told you, it must have been stolen from your safe. My dad stuck to the script. I know, but this is a huge opportunity, Jessica. $50,000. It would be life-changing. Is there any chance you might know someone, a dealer perhaps, who might have ended up with it? Maybe you could track it down? The collector is very motivated, but he needs the set intact for his collection. He dangled the bait, and she took it. I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. A few hours later, she called him back. In a stunning display of fabricated luck, she claimed she had made some calls to her contacts in the business, and miraculously, had located the jewelry at an antique shop a few towns over. She told my father that the dealer was driving a hard bargain, but she thought she could get it back if she acted fast. She was framing herself as the family hero, the savvy businesswoman saving the day. The next day, as confirmed by a discreet call from Mr. Sterling, Jessica walked into Sterling Antiquities. She didn't recognize him from their encounter years ago. To her, he was just some old shopkeeper she could manipulate. She explained that she had sold the jewelry in a moment of financial panic and that it had been a terrible mistake. She pleaded with him, telling him how much sentimental value it had, and asked to buy it back. Mr. Sterling, the consummate actor, feigned reluctance. He spoke of the interest he'd already had in the piece. He made her work for it. Finally, he agreed to sell it back to her for the exact amount he had paid her for it, plus a small inconvenience fee. She eagerly paid, using a credit card, no doubt thinking about the massive profit she was about to make. She had no idea that she had just paid to reacquire the evidence of her own crime, and the transaction was recorded, dated, and witnessed. The family appraisal was set for Saturday afternoon at my parents' house. The stage was almost ready. I spent the days leading up to it in a state of hyperfocus. I felt like a director preparing for an opening night. I went over the plan again and again. Mr. Sterling would arrive, introduce himself as the independent appraiser, and examine the jewelry. He would bring his tools, his loupe, his scales, and his leather-bound ledger. The beauty of the plan was its simplicity. It wasn't built on lies, but on revealing the truth in a controlled environment. Jessica was walking into a room where every element was designed to expose her. She believed she was the master mind of a brilliant financial scheme. She was about to find out she was merely the subject of a very personal, very meticulous archival project, and the final exhibition was about to begin. Saturday afternoon arrived, thick with unspoken tension. The air in my parents' living room was heavy, a mixture of my mother's nervous energy, my father's feigned excitement, and my own quiet, humming anticipation. I sat in an armchair, watching the door, feeling like an audience member waiting for the main performance to start. Jessica arrived last, sweeping in with a triumphant air. She was dressed in a sharp, expensive-looking blazer, a portrait of success. She was holding a small, elegant shopping bag from a high-end jeweler, not the original velvet box. Inside, I knew, was Grandma Rose's legacy, which to her was nothing more than a prop in her latest drama. "I got it," she announced, a wide, self-satisfied smile on her face. "It cost me a fortune to buy it back, but I couldn't let that opportunity slip through our fingers. You owe me big time for this, Dad." My father played his part, clapping her on the shoulder. "You did great, Jessica. The appraiser should be here any minute." Right on cue, the doorbell rang. I stood and opened the door. There stood Mr. Sterling, looking distinguished in a tweed jacket, carrying a leather briefcase. I met his eye for a split second, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. "Good afternoon," he said in his formal, pleasant voice. "I'm Mr. Sterling. I'm here for the appraisal." I led him into the living room. Jessica's smile faltered for a fraction of a second as she looked at him. A flicker of something, unease, vague recognition, crossed her face before she masked it with her usual confident veneer. He was, after all, just the anonymous old man she'd bought the jewelry from 2 days earlier. He wasn't supposed to be here. "A pleasure to meet you," she said, extending a hand. "I'm Jessica. I'm the one who recovered the piece." Mr. Sterling shook her hand politely, his expression unreadable. "A pleasure. Shall we begin?" We all gathered around the large oak dining table. Jessica, with a dramatic flourish, took the jewelry out of the bag and laid it on a soft cloth my mother had set out. The white gold gleamed under the light. For a moment, seeing it there, so beautiful and real, my breath caught in my throat. I felt a pang of love for my grandmother so sharp it almost buckled my knees. Mr. Sterling opened his briefcase and began to set up his tools with methodical precision: a jeweler's loupe, a small digital scale, and various reference books. And next to them, he placed his handsome, leather-bound ledger. Jessica eyed it with a hint of curiosity, but said nothing. He started with the necklace. He weighed it, measured it, and then picked up his loupe, bending closely to examine the filigree work and the maker's mark on the clasp. The room was silent, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall. "Exquisite craftsmanship," he murmured, more to himself than to us. "Typical of the period, the white gold is of high quality." He made a few notes on a pad. He then did the same for the bracelet and the earrings, his movements slow and deliberate. Jessica was practically vibrating with anticipation. She watched him like a hawk, the dollar signs almost visible in her eyes. Finally, Mr. Sterling put down his loupe and straightened up. He looked around the table, his gaze resting for a moment on each of us before landing on Jessica. "The jewelry is genuine," he announced, "and in excellent condition. Based on the quality, the craftsmanship, and the current market value for similar pieces, I would appraise this set for approximately $8,000. The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica's face crumpled. "What? 8,000? That's impossible. Your client was supposedly willing to pay 50,000. "My client?" Mr. Sterling asked, a note of polite confusion in his voice. "I'm sorry, you must be mistaken. I have no client. Your father contacted me for an independent insurance appraisal." Jessica's head whipped toward my father. "Dad, what is he talking about?" My father's face was a mask of stone. "There is no collector, Jessica." The color drained from her face. Her eyes darted between my father, my mother, and finally to me. Her confident facade was cracking, revealing the raw panic underneath. "What is this? What's going on?" This was my cue. I stood up. "What's going on, Jessica, is that we know you stole Grandma's jewelry from the safe 2 months ago." "I did not," she shrieked, her voice rising. "That is a vicious lie. I just spent a fortune getting this back for the family." "Did you?" Mr. Sterling interjected calmly. He opened his ledger. "Because my records show that you sold this exact set to me on October 15th for $7,500. And then, just 2 days ago, on December 5th, you bought it back FR. Owe me for $7,600. I have the receipts for both transactions, signed by you." He turned the ledger around for her to see. There, in his perfect script, were the entries clear as day. Jessica stared at it, her mouth opening and closing silently. "And that's not all," Mr. Sterling continued, flipping back a few pages in his book. "It seems we've met before. 7 years ago, you came to my shop and tried to sell me a set of counterfeit silver spoons. I have a record of that here, as well." He pointed to the older entry. My mother gasped. My father just stared at Jessica, his expression one of profound disappointment. The truth was laid bare on the table, more damning than any accusation. It was all there: the theft, the lies, the history of deceit, all meticulously documented. Jessica looked cornered, her eyes wild. She looked at me, and in her gaze I saw pure, unadulterated hatred. She finally understood. This wasn't a random series of events. It was a carefully constructed trap, and I was the one who had built it. "You," she whispered, her voice trembling with rage. "You did this." "I did," I said, my own voice quiet but steady. "You took the one thing Grandma wanted me to have. You took her story and you sold it for cash. I just bought it back with the truth." She had nothing left. No lies, no denials, no room to maneuver. The evidence was absolute, the witness unimpeachable. The truth, held up to the light like one of Mr. Sterling's diamonds, had revealed every single one of her flaws. The aftermath of the confrontation was not the explosive, screaming match I had half expected. Instead, a heavy, suffocating silence descended upon the room. Jessica stood frozen for a long moment, her face a pale mask of shock and fury. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. There was nothing left to say. Her web of lies had been so thoroughly dismantled that there wasn't a single thread left for her to cling to. Without another word, she turned and fled. She didn't grab her coat or her purse. She just ran out of the house, the sound of her car speeding away down the street a few moments later, leaving a definitive, jarring end to the scene. Mr. Sterling, with quiet dignity, began to pack his briefcase. "My work here is done," he said softly. He looked at me and gave a small, respectful nod. "An heirloom is not just an object. It's a repository of memory. I am glad you have yours back." My father, his voice thick with emotion, thanked him profusely and wrote him a check for his services, which Mr. Sterling initially tried to refuse. When he was gone, the three of us were left standing around the dining table, where the rose collection lay gleaming on the cloth. My mother finally broke the silence, sinking into a chair and letting out a long, ragged sob. It wasn't a cry of anger, but of deep, heartbreaking sorrow for the daughter she had lost, not to death, but to a sickness of character she could no longer deny. My father wrapped his arms around her, his own face etched with a pain that went far beyond the theft of jewelry. He looked at me over her shoulder. "I'm so sorry, Amanda," he said, his voice cracking. "I'm so sorry we ever doubted you." I walked over and gently picked up the necklace. The cool weight of the white gold felt solid and real in my hand. "It's not your fault," I said, and I meant it. Jessica's talent for manipulation was a force of nature. She's the only one to blame for this. In the weeks that followed, the consequences of that afternoon rippled through our family. Jessica went completely dark. She didn't answer calls or texts from our parents. A week later, my mother drove to her condo, only to find it empty. The doorman said she had packed up her car in the middle of the night and left. She had abandoned her job, her home, her entire life, all because her true self had been exposed. We heard through a distant cousin months later that she had moved across the country, trying to start over where no one knew her or the truth of what she had done. The rift she created may never fully heal. My parents grieve for her, and there's a permanent sadness in our family where Jessica used to be. But alongside the sadness, there is also a sense of peace. The constant tension, the walking on eggshells around Jessica's ego and her demands, is gone. Our family, though smaller, is now more honest. For me, life returned to its quiet rhythm, but with a newfound sense of strength. I had always seen my quiet nature and my love for the past as passive traits, but this experience taught me that they were my greatest strengths. My patience, my attention to detail, my belief in the power of a documented fact, these were the tools I had used to reclaim my legacy. I hadn't needed to scream or fight. I had simply needed to research, to investigate, and to present the truth. I wear my grandmother's necklace now, not every day, but on days when I need to feel her strength. And her love close to my heart. It's no longer just a symbol of her promise to me, but a reminder of my promise to myself. To always honor the truth, to protect the stories that matter, and to never underestimate the quiet power of a well-kept record. The rose collection sits in a beautiful new jewelry box on my dresser, not the original, tainted one. Sometimes I open it just to look at the intricate filigree, the tiny diamonds sparkling like stars. They are more than just gold and stone. They are a legacy restored, a testament to the fact that while some people see only monetary value in the past, its true worth lies in the stories it tells and the love it carries forward. And that is a value that can never be sold.